All right, everybody, welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. And I'm excited today to welcome back Jeddy Azuma, who I had the pleasure of meeting a couple years ago. And we've just stayed in contact through our circle, our friends, and obviously on social. And being that he's a father, I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about that. And we had some affinity there, and then we're both kind of in the coaching space. And so I love what Jeddy's up to. I love what he's created, and loved it so much that we wanted to come back on the podcast. And I was just on his too, and so it's been nice to bridge the gap of where we were and where we are now. But for those of you who are hearing Jeddy for the first time, let me just give you a little backstory on who he is. Jeddy Azuma is the founder of the Rising Man Movement, a wilderness rites of passage guide, and a men's leadership mentor and coach. Since 2008, Jeddy has been in the fields of men's empowerment and mentored a wide range of men, from high-powered tech founders and corporate leaders to hardworking family men and vision-driven millennials. He has impacted the lives of thousands of men on his mission to initiate an entire generation into purpose-driven leadership. Despite his achievements, he considers his most important roles in life to be a father and a husband. My favorite part. Jeddy, it's been an honor, brother. Welcome back. I'm excited to dive in today.
Yeah, man. Happy to be here. Happy to drop in with you. And I love just having these conversations. And if we can record them and benefit somebody else, then man, I'm all for it.
Right. That's the beauty of the podcast, man. So what, like, I know from what you do, it's men. Why men and why vision?
Well, the simplest, straightest answer is because it's exactly what I needed and what I felt like I didn't have when I was a teen. Without going too deeply into my backstory, I grew up in the New York City suburbs just across the pond in New Jersey. Suburban, pretty ordinary middle class upbringing, played sports, did well in school, and had no idea who I was by the time it was ready for me to leave the house. And I went to college, not even really understanding what college was, but just being directed and led there by my parents. And I'm not saying by any means that I didn't have a great childhood. I know there's a lot of people who have a lot less and get by with a lot less than I did. But as far as masculine direction and honesty and vulnerable experiencing with other men, I didn't even get that until I had to go out and find it myself in my mid-20s. Mm-hmm. And went through a whole bunch of hard stuff during that time without having that guidance. So when I found something that worked for me, when I finally encountered a lot of the work that I'm sure we'll get into more later on this episode, I just wanted to share that with as many men as I could. Because everybody I met, they wanted to know, what are you doing? What are you into that's helping you make these changes in your life? And I'd realized, wow, I've got something that most other men don't have. Yeah. And I've come to appreciate that not just as privileged experience, but actually a birthright. To me, it's a birthright to have this degree of mentorship and modeling that just got dropped off the boat a few generations ago, maybe more.
Yeah.
That's why.
You seem to have when I look at you, when I hear you, when I watch you, you have a very calm demeanor. Mm-hmm. It's not frantic. It's organized. It's grounded. Have you always had that? Like, was that always been a part of your nature, or have you crafted that?
Well, first of all, thank you for that acknowledgement. Yeah. A lot of times I feel like a duck, right? It's like all calm on the surface, but my feet were running a million miles underneath. And I think that's what it was originally. I'd say that to answer your question, it's been an evolution. I was always really good at containing what I was feeling because my mom almost died when I was 9. So I almost lost the most important person in my life at a young age because she was battling cancer. And I didn't want to be a distraction. I wanted all of the attention and energy to go into getting my mom better. So I learned how to contain a lot as a kid. And that was really hurtful and harmful to me in many ways. But it also taught me how to be calm and composed on the surface. Now, over the years, I've learned how to slow down my feet so that I can be that duck, but also just have my feet gliding in the water so that it's actually real, so that it's authentic. And it's not always that way. I get caught off center. I get in my emotions and in my feelings at times. It's human, but it's less and less over the years. And I attribute that a lot to just the training that I've done mentally, physically, emotionally.
I love that. Vision obviously is essential to, I think, living not only a fulfilling life, but one that helps create impact on self, others, community, world.
Mhm.
What are what do you find the challenges are with people who don't have a vision and want one? People who say they have a vision but don't have one, and like, so what are some challenges in creating one, I guess, and then what are some challenges in maybe even articulating it or embodying it?
Oof. All right, I'm going to ask for your help here to steer me along because I've got a lot to say on this subject.
Okay.
The first thing that comes up to me is um, anyone who has a vision without action is just a dreamer, right? Those are those of us who just, we get all excited about possibilities. It's those of us who've had a million different amazing ideas but never took real action on any of them. Those are just
Yes.
dreams.
Right.
So having a vision without action is just a dream. Now, there's also people who have a lot of action, but no vision of where they're going. And that's just like shooting in the darkness, shooting at targets blindly into the dark. And some people get caught like that, running on the hamster wheel and not actually knowing where they're going. So it's really this blend of vision and action that yields a purpose-driven leader in the world. And what I've come to find is that when men are oriented and geared towards a vision that is built on the foundation of values, what they value in themselves and around them, and then drive that with steady action and commitments, you end up finding the men that we always wanted to have, the fathers that we all hoped that we had when we were kids, the brothers, the best friends that we want to surround ourselves with, these good men that we all know in our hearts is available, but we don't know how to get there. So that's the way that I tend to look at vision and this it's really the masculine and the feminine, that envisioning, closing my eyes and seeing something I care about enough to move towards it. That's the feminine part of vision. That's the dream. That's the creative space, where the action is when we get into our masculine, and we really need both.
What's the difference for you between a goal and a vision?
Well, so this will take me back to when I was 25 years old and I was looking for a vision. I knew my life was about something big. I just didn't know what it was. And I was out there hunting for it, man. I literally was traveling around with a backpack all over the Southwest, West Coast for 4 months at the age of 25 because I knew there was something inside. I just didn't know what it was. And at the time, I thought that my vision would be something that the clouds would part. There would be this magical moment where all of a sudden it's like, this is my purpose, this is my calling. And then I could take that thing, hammer it into stone, and just work at it for the next 30 to 35 years. That's what I thought vision was. Come to find that vision is constantly evolving and taking new shape and new form. So that was one of my first lessons. I had to learn that, okay, what I think my life is about presently, right now in this moment, may not and likely will not be exactly the same 5 years from now or 10 years from now. But at least I can start to identify where that voice of truth is within me and learn to listen to that, because it's like my, those old school navigation tools where like you see the kid walking around with like a stick. It looks like a slingshot, like that. It's like that internal GPS radar that I start to connect to that just steers me in directions. It's intuition. A lot of people call it intuition or your gut. And connecting more to that, making decisions from that place, it may not always end up being what I hoped it would be or thought it would be, but it's a step towards that ultimate mountaintop that I see off in the distance.
Yeah. Do you find that, let's say you have a vision and then you begin working on it and it's fueled by values, and then within that maybe you have intermittent goals or whatever. It's like you have all of that. Do you find that as you have it and you just know what it is, you stop thinking about it and you just focus on the process of it? And it can kind of feel that you don't have a vision even though you do, because what you're doing is just the things that you've committed to that you once established when you had the initial vision.
Yeah. So thank you for steering me back to goals as well, because what I want to say about goals is I think goals are really useful, and having targets, having things to aim for that are a reflection of a bigger picture vision. It's like I have a friend of mine who we do this wilderness rites of passage work together, and when a man comes back from this really powerful experience, this immensely clarifying experience in his life, we bring them back and we tell them, don't throw the Hail Mary. right?
Yeah.
Don't pick up the ball and try to score a touchdown or hit a home run on your first swing when you get back out into the world. In fact, we just want to get that first 3-yard pass, right? What's that first step in this direction? Because we know that so much can change. And a lot of times we're fueled by this excitement of vision. Vision is very exciting. It's inspiring. We get that like creative energy and we want to go for it. But learning how to manage that energy in more of a slow burn instead of this fast burn, that's where I think goals are really valuable and useful. And knowing that I can set some short-term intermediate goals and then reassess where I'm at now. I'll give a quick metaphor that I always use when I talk about vision and values. I think it'll set up the context for the conversation. To me, vision is this mountaintop, this ultimate peak that I see in the distance. This is my Everest, right? And my Everest is different than your Everest. All right? It's that thing that I see when I close my eyes, imagining myself standing at the summit of this huge mountain that I've climbed is so compelling that I want to wake up and I want to start climbing towards it. And I want to do that every single day. Some days are harder than others. There's setbacks on the trail, but ultimately there's that peak that calls me forward. Now, I don't get to that peak by staring at it all the time, right? Those of us who just dream or always get stuck in the visioning process, you look at the mountain and then all of a sudden you trip over a rock right in front of you because you weren't looking down at what's happening presently. Right. So I need to be able to look up and check in with the big picture vision, zooming out to see it, and then I have to zoom back in and start, if you're hiking a literal mountain, you do most of your hiking by looking at what's in front of you or what's immediately around you. So that's where goals and targets come into play. Values is the borders of that trail, right? It's like the things that keep me on point. For me, it's things like integrity, discipline, service, growth, spirit, those things that shape the way that I move towards the mountaintop. And if I start straying off my values, like if you're driving on the highway and you hit the bumps, they're like blah, 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 blah. My values trigger that instinct in my body that says something ain't right here.
Yeah.
Something ain't right about this choice I'm making. So that's that interplay of vision, values, farsighted, nearsighted that I think is for the outdoorsy people could really relate to.
Of all the things that we experience as human beings, where would you rank the challenge of creating and having a vision within within those laundry list of items?
Ooh, that's a really great question, man. Well, I did a lot of my pre-visioning work before I had a wife and a family, thankfully. And at that point in my life, that seemed like the most difficult thing that I would ever do. It was really painful. When I was 23 years old, I was deeply addicted to nicotine and marijuana because it was so painful for me to be navigating a world, having no clue what I was there for. Yeah. Knowing that what I was doing every day that I woke up was in no way related to the big picture. It was like I woke up every day and I hiked a few steps down all these different trails. But at the end of the day, I didn't feel like I made any progress because I knew there was a mountain out there. I just couldn't see it. So I think for someone who's not deeply connected to and devoted to a vision or a purpose in their life, someone who hasn't identified that, it is the premier objective for that individual, specifically men. Have you read Way of the Superior Man by David Deida?
I have, yeah. Okay. It's been a minute.
All right. I reference it often because here's a good example of how it occurred for me. Somebody handed me that book for the first time when I was 21. And I got to I think it was either chapter 7 or chapter 11. I can't remember right now. But it's the one where he says, a man must make his purpose more important and more of a priority than anything else in his life, including his partner and his family. I read that line. I said, that's bullshit. Excuse me. That's BS. Put it down. Closed it up. I didn't pick it up again until I was 26. I read it again when I was 26. I was right about to get married. I was right about to go out on my fast for the first time. And I got it. I understood. He wasn't saying to ignore or neglect your family or your partner. But a man who tries to find purpose in just servicing his family and taking care of them, if there is still a higher calling beyond or above that, is always going to feel empty and ultimately resentful, either of himself or the external circumstances. Start resenting my family, my partner, my kids, because I see them as...
You're the reason why I'm not pursuing X, Y, and Z, yeah.
Exactly. And so, long-winded answer to your question, I do think it's one of the most challenging things that we have to do. And then after, of course, arriving at a vision or some clarity on purpose, incorporating that purpose is the hardest thing, trying
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
create that unique path in the world that nobody else has created before. That's the hardest.
I had a similar like reaction to what you said. I even felt a part of me rise up when you even said it now,
Mm.
but then quickly be addressed and like we've been through this, we've worked through this. So I imagine that that can sound and feel very triggering for people or for men specifically, since we're talking about that. But why? I mean, you kind of already said with the resentment piece, but why else is focusing on that and making that the priority beneficial? Like what else is amplifies and becomes better because of that?
Yeah, I would even go beyond the word beneficial. I'd say it's essential,
Hmm.
because I think that the essence of men, and I consider myself to be an expert, having worked with thousands of men over the years. I mean, I've literally been in men's organizations since I was 17 years old. So I've seen enough critical mass to know that inside the heart of every single man who I have ever met is a deep and longing desire to be of service to the people he loves. Period. Now, that's not to say that there aren't many men out there who have a very clouded sense of what being of service is, or have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of layers of pain and shame and wounding that is keeping them from being of service to the people that they love. But at the heart of all of us, the essential part of a man is to be of service, to take care of, to protect, to provide, to be the intermediary between adversity for the people that we love and care about. And in this kind of strange world that we live in now, where our biology is still so connected to the natural world, our genetics, like we literally have it written into our genetics how to survive in this world as hunters and gatherers. But we're living in this simulation, right? A lot of people like to think of it as a simulation of this bizarre world that our biology and our genetics haven't caught up to yet. So we're always constantly trying to reconcile this instinctual part that wants to just be of service, that wants to take care of, that wants to protect, that wants to provide. But this modern world is not designed for us to be men the way that we're genetically designed to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's my belief, right? Obviously, it's
Yeah.
a pretty strong
I
opinion, pretty strong
no, I
stance,
like that. Yeah.
but that's how I
And
come to
yeah.
see it.
And then if you don't have that, I think about all the things that then occur, right? Like there's no purpose, there's no vision. You end up becoming a tumbleweed, so to speak, blowing in the wind. You probably it's easier to become addicted to substances to maybe numb the pain of not having a purpose. I imagine suicide rates go up. You out like take the anger and the frustration out on people that don't deserve it, and could potentially become abusive or emotionally, mentally, physically. You can incarceration rates, I'm sure, rise with this, right? Like fatherless homes, like lots of things, right? And I think if there's one thing to focus on that could help alleviate a lot of that, vision seems to be that.
Well, and here's a beautiful story that I'll share here. I'm glad that you brought it all the way back to, fathers in the homes and having those models. I always think about professional athletes and young
Hmm.
celebrities when I think about this. These 18, 19, 20-year olds who are being given $100 million contracts after having been raised in poverty. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them, right? It's like such a huge shift energetically from one place to another. And all of us trying to go from what we've seen, what's been modeled for us, what's been passed on ancestrally from one generation to the next, to try to make these changes without a strong example
Hmm.
of what a fully integrated man who is clear on his values, who's vision driven, vision connected, it's just not readily available to many people. And we have to do our best to start putting out these new examples of what it looks like to be a man in the world. Otherwise, we're just going to keep getting the same results. I mean, the story is so easy to piece together, right? Every time that there's a mass shooter, before I even look past the headline, right? Mass shooting, Dallas, Texas, X number of people dead, wounded, right? What do we know right off the bat? We know with near certainty that it's going to be a male, who committed the act, and we dig a little bit deeper into their past, this is somebody who either had a fatherless household, a father who wasn't present, and or a father who was abusive, and then some other type of abuse, some other type of bullying, some other type of neglect or failure on the community to help raise this individual.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't ever excuse the actions that that person takes. I'm never trying to give a pass. Everyone gets to be accountable for what we do. But when we start to put this puzzle together, and we look at all these different elements, and now social media and hip hop songs that are talking about all, like guns and gangs, and now you have kids who are growing up in wealthy, affluent neighborhoods flashing guns on Instagram because they think that's what a man does.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not hard to figure out the story when you actually take time to look at the pieces. And there's a lot we can do about it. It's like trying to swim against the ocean sometimes, but there's so much that can be done because of what I said before. Every one of those boys, every single one of these young men, inside there, in that heart, is a sweet, loving, compassionate, kind, devoted young man who wants to be of service. All he needs is somebody to help shine some light in there and teach him how to unlock it.
Yeah. And if not, then the darkness will come out.
There's that African proverb, right? That I'm going to butcher the wording, but it's essentially if the village doesn't initiate its boys, then they'll burn down the village simply to feel the heat of the fire. Stick around.
Yeah, truth, bro. Like, to use that as an example, right? The tribe, maybe even still in the world, I imagine, are a lot of rites of passage. You probably know this more than I am, and so there's initiation from boy to man, clear distinction between like, here's what it's like to not be a man, and or to be a boy, and here's what it's like to be a man, and with that comes a level of what's the word I'm looking for? Reverence, sacredness, right? The journey and the intentionality of maturity. In the States, and maybe even in the Western world, we don't have that.
Yeah.
So this is something that I've thought about, and maybe it stemmed from our previous conversation, but I know I've talked to some other people about it. It's like, what type of initiation do I want to create for my boys? Right? In future leaders, like at what ages do I do what and bring it to their awareness that they're learning these things for a specific reason, and this is what it's like to be a man. But I can only do that if, one, I have the awareness, and two, I take the time to actually do that. We don't do that in America, at least, or at least I haven't seen that. And so that's why I love what you do, is because you're doing something about that and creating spaces where there can be rites of passage. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, you said number one and number two. I'd say number three is also making sure that you've done that yourself, right? And just in all of our practices, I don't ever teach someone or ask someone to do something that I haven't done myself. To me, that's irresponsible as a mentor, as a teacher, as a guide. And when I got started in this work, when I went out, I fasted for the first time back in 2014, and I came back with a vision of initiating young men. It was so clear.
Why fasting?
Why fasting?
Mm-hmm.
So I was invited into a tradition, a community in Southern California that was a derivative of this tree that was reintroducing rites of passage back into Western culture. I like to say that it fell off the boat. All of our ancestors, everywhere in the world that we all come from, those of us who are not native to or indigenous to the Americas, we all have evidence of land-based rites of passage that has a combination of solo time in the wilderness without food and or water, and maybe other conditions or circumstances in our lineage. It doesn't matter whether you grew up or whether your lineage is in Europe or the Eastern Asia or Africa. There's evidence of these traditions that go back to the earliest humans. Okay. So I like to think that it fell off the boat. And what you're saying is that there has to be this opportunity to reintroduce this to communities, traditions of peoples who don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
And for those of us who have virtually no connection, I mean, many of us, the whole mission of our ancestors in coming to this place was to assimilate, to become a part of this new American culture, right? It was not safe. It was not secure to bring elements of our old culture to this new land. In fact, don't even have to talk about it. Look how many people have been persecuted for practicing their traditions in their way. So a lot of that had to get discarded or forgotten about, or best case scenario, hidden in the background so that the next generations had a better opportunity to thrive here. So I chose fasting because my ethnic background is my father's family's from Japan, my mother's family's from Europe. Neither of them had any strong connection to cultural practices, let alone rites of passage traditions for young people. And I was always called to an earth based, nature based, naturalist connection to spirit. And so this opportunity with this community in Southern California said, hey, we offer 4-day solo vision fasts. And I said, hey, that sounds like a really great opportunity for me to go and do this visioning work that I was calling in for myself. And so I think I was going somewhere else with that, but did I answer your question?
Yeah. It was, yeah, I don't remember what.
That's right. It'll come back around.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just, I guess it was just like, how do we introduce the lineage, the right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the whole point of what I was saying is that we all, to me, it really is a birthright, because there's enough evidence out there that we all have this, regardless of where we come from, to have some sort of rites of passage that would identify the distinction between a boy and a man. And most of us have not had that experience. Most of us come from people who had it, but then lost it along the way. And so I think it's our responsibility to begin offering this back and integrating this back. And because it's hard for all of us to go all the way back to where we came from, I think there's actually a great opportunity for us to create new traditions or to integrate old traditions and make them relevant to people nowadays. Because some rites of passage traditions, I'll tell you for myself, I'm not prepared for it. Right? You watch like some of these things that other tribes and really ancient peoples do. They were designed to present an obstacle, a gauntlet, a crucible for a young person to go through, literally to demonstrate readiness. And sometimes they wouldn't survive it.
I'm thinking of the Spartans when you say this.
There you go. I mean, that's another great example, right? A lot of people, because that's been commercialized. We saw it on 300. There's a rite of passage process. And have you ever read the book Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield?
No.
That goes really in depth. So anybody out there who loved 300 and Spartan culture, Gates of Fire, Stephen Pressfield, that really goes into the raw and real element that many of these boys didn't survive the training. They died during the training for one reason or another. It's well documented that Spartan culture, they discarded some of their children, babies, who were deemed physically unfit when they were born. Right, so there were much harsher conditions.
Barbaric.
Yeah,
primal.
Primal. I think
primal
is the right word for me, because you look around at the rest of nature outside of human nature, it's gnarly, man, and it's violent, and it's real, true. And that's within all of us. We can't forget that either. That's another tangent, but yeah, man, I think it's so important. I thought that I was going to just do this work with teens when I first got into it. That was like the vision, and then I realized, whoa. I can't start with teens. There's no examples on the other side of the threshold for them to follow. We got to initiate the fathers. We got to initiate the uncles. And that's when I started to direct my attention towards men who were a little bit older or kind of like in that delayed launch into the world.
Yeah.
Free up this logjam so that eventually we can get back to the teens,
love that,
ones, etc.
So on the Spartans, I just found this out like 3 days ago, maybe 4 days ago. Mm-hmm. Leonidas was 60 years old when he led them into that battle that 300 is about. And I was like, 60? And then you look at a 30-year-old who believes that they've peaked physically nowadays. I'm like, dude, the culture, the belief, and the system of, like, I don't know, maturation of a man was insane. Like 60.
I know.
And then with like health, like, what is it called? Stem cells and the way technology is going, we're increasing our lifespan. So, I mean, it's not far-fetched that we're going to live maybe 10, 20 years more. So, like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, being that Leonidas was 60, like, that just for me, breaks through all beliefs that I'm reaching a peak at 40, 50. And now that's the new benchmark, right? Like, so what do you think about that?
I have two ideas about that. My first idea, which is something I hadn't really thought of until we got into this, is that purpose was given to boys in cultures like Spartan culture, right?
Mm,
There was a code. I think of samurai culture, the Bushido code, right? There,
yeah.
where purpose was given. And it was very clear that your purpose, your life is not yours.
Mm,
Spartans believed that, samurai believed that. It was a code of honor. It was a collective consideration. You know, my life is only as valuable as it is to the collective, not just myself. And I think that's a huge departure from what we experience nowadays. Our
hmm
egos are so self-serving and self-protective that even just in contrast, right? If we could teleport a Spartan from however long ago that was, like I think we're going on what, like 1500 years ago, to present day and have them, you know, look at what we call the warriors of our society, I think they'd be like, well, what is that, right? Why are you doing a
You
selfie?
would have been discarded, bro.
Yeah, right. Like selfies. Could you imagine Spartans doing selfies? Even the word selfie, right? It's all about me. Um, so that's the first thought that I have is I think purpose was granted to boys, even just people, right? Children ascending into adulthood. Purpose was granted to them as part of their cultural and traditional practices. So I think that's one thing that is noticeably and markedly different from our society. I think the other thing is that when you think of Leonidas, right? His purpose was so clear at such an early stage of his life, and there wasn't really much more for him to do than to
hmm
provide for his people and guarantee that the next generation was able to thrive.
hmm
All it was about. It was so simple. It was so simple. Now we live in a day and age where I mean, talk about vision, right? The variety of vision, the possibilities that we've granted ourselves. On one hand, it's wonderful because you can tell a kid, I can tell my son, you can be whatever you want when you grow up. Do you think Spartans were saying that to their children? Hell no.
Right.
They're like, you're going to pick up a shield and you're going to defend the honor of your people and you're going to die on your shield for your people. That's what you do. That's what we do. That's who we are.
hmm
You're Spartan. It's a privilege to be able to tell our children, you could be whatever you want. And I think the cost to that is that that's a lot of responsibility for a young person to take on for themselves. It's empowering, but that's really difficult. That's a
Yeah.
lot, right? I mean, if I told my son today that his destiny was to be a karate master, which he might actually be on board for. He's super into karate right now. He might be like, "All right, Dad, dope. Let's do it. Let's do it every day." Um, I think that would take away a lot of this. Who am I? What do I like? What do I care about? That
hmm
um, I'm just volunteering my opinion. I don't think neurologically we're prepared to make those kinds of decisions as a
Or have so many options.
yeah. I don't think I think we've gotten there too quickly, right? Even a century ago, those options weren't even available, right? And so we're talking three generations, maybe four generations, and all of a sudden we've gone from you know what your destiny is. You grew up in a farming family. You're going to be a farmer someday. To hey, you can be whatever you want. You want to be a YouTuber, be a YouTuber. You want to travel the world, travel the world. You want to go to college, sure, why not? Um, I don't think we. I think we are creating a problem we didn't anticipate.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. And I agree with that. And that's troubling. And no one and it's not like people are teaching us how to think either. Right? So with with this endless, it seems, supply of options that I have to sift through, and no one taught me how to think about myself or how to organize myself in correlation to all these options. Now it just becomes overwhelm. And now I'm spent so much in my head overthinking about what the right choice is that I end up making no choice. And then with no choice comes no vision, and then it's just this loop.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky. You know, here we go talking about raising children, right? So my son is 7 years old. My daughter's 4. My son's almost 8. I should call him 8 at this point. And it's so challenging to help mold my kids to prepare them to make these big decisions at earlier and earlier ages. I mean, the fact that we have to choose a major for when we're 17 years old, essentially the message is you have to choose what you want to do for the next 30 to 35 years of your life. Go. Who the hell has any idea what that decision is, right?
Right.
I looked up I'm sure the percentages are different now, but the amount of people, I think there was a research study about the amount of millennials who are actually utilizing their primary degree as their means of making an income. It was like, I think it was like less than 15%.
I was going to say like 10%.
It was ridiculous, man. I'm sure it's going down way more. Here's another thing I think about, right? I always look for how much is changing just inside of one generation. When I was growing up, most of my friends, their parents, they worked for a company, right? Some of them were nurses, some of them were teachers. They all had different occupations, but they worked for a company, essentially. They had a boss. Mm-hmm. And the outliers in my friend groups were the parents who were self-employed. I didn't even know the word entrepreneur, but being self-employed. I remember one of my friend's dads, he was a motivational speaker, right? And regardless of who he was as an individual, his unique personality, the energy I felt from the parents, even at that age, was there's something irresponsible about him. There's something immature about him. There's something that cannot be trusted about him because of this way that he goes about making a living. And he was an unusual cat, right? Like everything he did was much less structured. It's more like a traditional entrepreneurial path. Mm-hmm. But it was the outlier, right? And everyone was afraid of it, you know? And nowadays, what's being glorified more than anything is being self-employed, be an entrepreneur, be your own boss, create your own destiny. And that's really cool and all, but that's a huge shift. And I'm talking about inside of 2-3 decades.
Yeah.
You know?
Fair.
So that, you know, it's just, there's so many pieces to look at. And I kind of reel myself in because I'm like, all right, what is right in front of me right here, right now? I cannot control the world that my children will inherit, but I can influence the way that they will be able to encounter and interact with it by what I do, what I model for them, what I teach them. So where my parents were all about get good grades, be athletic, get to a college, get a degree that you can make money, and boom. I'm teaching my children how to think more critically, how to begin to identify what they actually want. And if they see an obstacle in their way of getting what they want, what are some creative ways you might be able to make that possible? Mm-hmm. Getting my children essentially to start thinking like entrepreneurs, because I think that that's the world they're going to encounter. I think that the outliers, by the time my kids are parents, are going to be the people who still work for a corporation.
Yeah.
Or at least I think it's going to level out a little bit.
Yeah. What would you say, your wife, how long you guys been married again?
Going on 9 years.
9 years. So almost a decade.
Almost.
And my wife and I are 12 years, and there's been so many chapters within that time frame, right? Mm-hmm. So for you, 9 years, what would you say your wife would say if you asked her what's been one of the biggest shifts that you've made as a man, and maybe loop in potentially father and husband in the last, let's say, 3 years?
I can go grab her right now if you want. It's more fun for me to anticipate. What would she say has been the biggest change? And I think we're very much actively in this process. I would like to think that what she's seen change in me has been the way that I anticipate life. Because when she met me, she's also 6 years older than me. So that's an important piece to mention, that she's watched me grow up. Thankfully I found the most amazing woman at the right time, and she was patient and tolerant enough to be with me through my growth spurts and growth stages in my 20s. I would say that there's more of a maturity and a deliberateness with how I make decisions and how I move towards what I care about. It's a reflection of the way I move in the world now. It's a reflection of the way I'm making decisions. I think that the ambitiousness that I had, I was a little less considerate of my family and taking them along for the ride through my 20s and my early 30s. Whereas now I'm much more, I tend to them much more than I had previously, which I know my wife appreciates and my children appreciate. And just the flip side of it, just because I think it's kind of fun, like what has changed and what hasn't. I know this is what she would say, is that I've always been a man of integrity, that I've always been someone you can count on that is going to be who I say I am. And not to say that I was the most integral person in my early 20s, but that I've continued to strive towards that. And
It's an
that's,
ideal. Yeah.
and the best thing about it is it's something that's available to anyone. You don't have to have any money. You don't have to have any prestige or acclaim to your name. Every one of us can go about our lives being who we are, who we say we are, and doing what we said we would do. And that is probably the most valuable asset on this planet.
I think it creates freedom because there's nothing that you have to pretend to do. There's no lie that you have to keep going. There's no fronting. There's no effort in the way of like manufacturing something. It's just it just is.
Yeah, it really is that, man. It's that simple. It's not easy.
Right.
The difference. It's simple to just be that man. A lot of times it's the humility to admit the places where I have shortcomings, where there's places I still want to work on myself. But it is really the simplest thing that we can do because it's available to everybody. And it takes a lot less effort to than trying to put on this idea or this mask of who I want other people to perceive me as, but just being who I am.
Yeah. And I think that's what I sense when I talk to you, is like that acceptance and understanding of that. So for someone who wants to work on this, right, establish a vision, what would you say are some effective questions that, let's say, a 20-year-old listening, anyone in their 20s, I mean, I know that that's let's go a little bit more specific, 25 to 30.
Sure.
And then let's go someone in their over 34. So 34 to 40 and above, right? Yeah. Well, would that be the same question? Or if not, what questions / question would you suggest they wrestle with, sit with, journal about, talk about to help them either create a vision or strengthen their vision?
Yeah. Firstly, I've personally found age and chronological age to be irrelevant. There's an age of maturity that I think is more important. But there's certainly like a large cluster of people in that age range that you said that could benefit from this. So my answer is the same. Firstly, before even asking questions, I talk about how can we create the conditions for clarity? Because to me, that's one of the most important pieces. I can give you a bunch of questions and tell you to journal on them, but unless there's enough of
the environment
noise that's tuned out, it's hard to connect to. So, going back to my personal way of helping men to create that, taking guys out into the middle of nowhere, having them spend 4 days by themselves without food. We're completely remote, so there's no cell phone service, there's no internet, no social media, no books. We don't even let you have a tent. You're just sleeping out under the stars. All there is nature around you and the voice of truth within. So I usually say it's like, those audio engineers, they've got the master boards and they've got all the dials, right? In life, ordinarily, we've got all those dials turned up. There's social media, there's my marriage, there's my children, there's my work. And when we go out to these places, we turn everything else down. And the only thing that's left on is the master volume, that inner truth. So first creating those conditions, because you can ask all the greatest questions in the world, but unless you're in a circumstance like that, a context like that, it's not the same. And then the first question, and probably the hardest question that men ever ask themselves, is what do I want? What do I want? And not the superficial what do I want, like what do you want to eat for lunch? I'm talking about what do you want for your life to look like? What do you want for yourself? You know how many men have a hard time answering that question? Producing an answer?
So many.
Yeah.
And I have a question on that, but I'll let you finish.
I mean, that's really the gateway.
Okay.
Is
yeah.
What do you want? And giving yourself full permission to say that, not to be afraid or feel ashamed of what you might say you want because someone told you that you shouldn't want that, or that you should want something differently or want it a different way. So that's the starting point, and it is giving a real full permission to self to declare what I want. And sometimes it's identifying what I don't want too. A lot of people say,
True.
well, I don't know what I want. And I'm like, well, I bet you know what you don't want. So
Right, right.
we can get to David by chipping away at some marble too in the other direction.
Hmm.
But it's really all the same process from the same origin question.
What do you think about asking the question of what do you want versus who do you want to be?
Yeah, that's good. I think those are both really important.
They are. They totally.
Typically, I think that asking somebody what they want gets the ball rolling. And then a good mentor, a good guide will remind them, well, it's less about what the result is at the end and who you want to be in the process. So
Yeah.
to me, what I want, that's thinking more about vision, right? What is that life that when you close your eyes, you envision for yourself, even if it's not that clear, even if it's just like a few brushstrokes on the canvas masterpiece of your life. Just let's get a few things out there. And then quickly I move into values, because to me, that's who I want to be while I'm creating that
Hmm.
masterpiece. So
Hmm.
that was good. I'm glad that you asked that, because
Yeah.
that's ultimately where it goes to.
Yeah, cool. Because they go hand in hand, and I've always, I mean, this hasn't been a long thought, but I've asked myself, what order do I think is most effective? And 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 maybe it depends on where someone is in their life, and you got to meet them where they're at. But my initial kind of response was, who do you want to be, and then what do you want? Because I find that if people ask what they want, they tend to go for materialistic things that they think once they get, they'll feel a certain way, or life will make sense, or whatever. But it seems to be, from my experience, more built on materialistic things than something that comes from within, as opposed to asking, who do you want to be? Because that creates the character that habits can then stem from. And then if you continue to be that type of person in all of the environments that you're in, you begin to add value from an authentic, genuine place. And that differentiates you from everybody else. And that compounded over time attracts the right things because of the person that you're being.
Yeah.
That was my thought process.
Yeah, and it's a good one, because you're absolutely right. When people first start to answer this question, this is why it's not just a simple thing that you can ask on a Thursday afternoon, right?
At a happy hour.
Or happy hour. Right? Yeah, what do you want? Oh, a little bit. Tesla. It's usually it's a reflection of what's something deeper that's underneath it, and there's some excavating to do. So when somebody
Sure.
says, well, I want $1 million and I want a house, I'm like, okay, well, what's underneath that? Ultimately, it comes down to some really core common roots of security, freedom, and purpose. That's what everybody really wants at the end of it. Now, what is your version of security, freedom, and purpose? That's important to be able to envision and know that that vision may change. But the conversation, I'm a big process over results person. I know that,
Yeah.
like, especially corporate coaching and this whole industry, everything is like outcomes, results, results, results. I'm like, man, but the process is so much more important, right? It's like, even results are like exits off the freeway. It happens. It's a moment. It's a milestone, right? The moment that you sell your company and have a huge public exit, right? Like, that's a moment in time. It literally lasts for minutes, and the hangover is maybe a couple of days or weeks. But the process of who you were to get there, that's what sticks. Those are the reps that get put in behind the scenes. That's Kobe Bryant in the gym at 3 a.m. shooting 3-pointers by himself in the darkness, right? Like, that's the stuff that really molds character. And even beyond that, that's where legacy is built. We think that legacy happens in these moments, these pinnacle achievements and accomplishments. But no, I don't care how many rings LeBron James has. People respect LeBron James because of who he's been along the way. Right? That's what people ultimately talk about. I'm a big sports guy, so when they put stuff up on the screen, they always put, NBA leader in this, all-time record this, but they talk about the way that he is. They talk about the discipline, the drive, the character that he has on the court that is immeasurable. It's you can't quantify it. It's just, that's the process part of it all, and that's
I
also
love that.
something we have more control over too.
Yeah, it's true. I would argue the only thing we have control over really stems from your minds and your emotions, but your actions, and that would be daily actions, daily deposits to build the legacy. Who, as a man in the public eye, do you respect, admire, look up to, enjoy witnessing because of what they embody and maybe their values?
Oh man. I'm gonna say a name that probably nobody knows here. Again, I'm a big sports guy. I've been following the New York Jets my whole life, and they have a head coach. His name's Robert Saleh. I don't know if anybody will actually know who he is, but of course, they're my favorite team, so I've been watching them. But the way that this man interacts in this world that expects greatness, that expects achievement, that's billions of dollar industry, right? Like crazy. And you can tell it's the answers he gives to the media when he holds press conferences. It's the moments that they catch behind the scenes. He's determined to help mold and mentor the men on that team. He wants them to be victorious. Obviously, he wants them to win championships, but only as a reflection of how they've been in the process. And to me, that's such a rare thing to see in the public eye. And it's so rare to see men, especially in the world, who prioritize that. And he's also a family man. I think he has something like 7 children too, which is crazy to me. I don't know how you do more than 2.
That'll do it to you.
But and just the way that, and who knows, right? I'm not expecting him to be. I'm sure he's not perfect, and he probably
sure.
admit that too. But to be such a public person and to have so much humility and character behind what he says, and I always think that leaders are the ones who give all the accolades and responsibility away when things go well and take all the accountability and responsibility on when things don't go well. And he just does that so naturally. So I don't know him personally. I hope to meet him one day and get to pick his brain a little bit more and see how much of that is real. But my gut tells me that he's one of the few who really live by a moral code in that world.
I love that. Cool. Well, as we wind down here, what would be, what are some, for those who have kids, what are some exercises that you do with them that you've seen, one, it's fun, it's engaging, it's fulfilling, but it's also very educational and teaching and kind of starting the initiation process?
Oof. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of different ways to do it, but something that I found to be really rewarding for me and for my son is I've always been an outdoorsy type of guy, so I do my best to get my kids interested and excited about it. I took my son out on a camping trip maybe about 6 weeks ago now. And we've done that before, but we hadn't done it in a while. And this was the first time that it took him completely out of his element. Threw a backpack on him for the first time. He was carrying a lot of his gear. We walked on accident. I took him 5 miles in, on accident. I thought it was 3 and it turned out to be 5. My bad. But just the vulnerability that he was able to access, the conversations we had, because we were just 2 of us out on a trail. We didn't see anybody pretty much the whole time. Just getting out into the wilderness, getting out into nature, just observing him, interacting with his environment in a different way because it was unfamiliar and it was uncomfortable. And he started to break down towards the end of that 5 miles into camp, when are we going to get there? And just being that vessel that he could just freak out and call me names and be angry and frustrated and sad and then exuberant when we arrived. It just gave his personality so much more room to stretch out.
That's a great way of putting that.
Yeah. Giving those kids a chance to get out of their element, out of their routine, and then just be there for them. It sounds really simple. I was talking to him about, hey, we're going out pretty far. If something happens to Dad, how would you get back? And it was scary for him. He didn't even want to think about it because he got lost during a Halloween party one time for 10 minutes and it traumatized him. So he really has a hard time. So just consciously inviting that hypothetical scenario into his mind and then getting him to asking him, okay, well, if you turn around, which way did we go down that trail? Do you remember? What do you remember about when we were walking? And just those little things, man. I think it begins to shape their mind and prepare them for the world. So that's the best we can do is prepare them.
Dude, that's inspiring. I'm definitely going to do that with my son. But the questions are even the way you asked it, right? Do you remember? What do you remember? Because a lot of times we can get caught in our own assumptions and assume that because they say they remember, they know what we think they know Or yeah, right. We think they know what we know, but we won't know unless we ask it in a way that exposes what they know.
Yeah.
Right. So that little last question that you asked was totally helpful for both parties. I know now what he remembers, so I can remind him what I think he should remember. Mm-hmm. And two, I know how much he got from it, so I know how effective this is going. Yeah. Right? Like, so much data can come from just asking the question differently. And I think as a parent, for me, I think about those things, and I'm not perfect. I get lazy with my questions, but like reminding myself to be as intentional as possible.
Yeah, man. And listen, that's me on my best day. That's me on my best day. And there's plenty of times where I find myself just doing too much for my kids. Like, I'm doing it because it's faster and more comfortable for me than to just take more time, be late, make a mess, and let them learn. And I think I know it's challenging for me. It's really challenging for me because I'm like a recovering perfectionist by nature. So having messy children is like,
yeah, but it's hard.
it's hard, but if I really care about my son being prepared for the world and being independent and self-driven, self-directed, then it's an easy choice.
Yeah. Well, I respect you, brother, as a father, as a husband, as a man, as a leader. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for your heart. Thank you for your wisdom. And I think, I won't say above all that, but especially your commitment to the craft. And for me, mastery is such a big driver of why I do what I do. And I sense that in you too. And I think we need more people who develop that sort of mindset towards whatever they view as their craftsmanship, for many reasons. But I love that about you. So thank you for being on the show and sharing all of your insights, brother.
Yeah, man. Honored. And very, very much reciprocate what you said back to me, man. There's a lot of mutual respect and appreciation for you and for your craft. I really value people who have been willing to put in the time and the reps and also have the humility to acknowledge where they are in their journey and in their process and aren't punching above their weight class. And I see you as a man who's punching beautifully within your weight class and landing some heavy body shots, man. You're a kid.
Hey. Yeah, brother. Cool, man. Well, thank you. Peace, everybody. Go out there, be your own 1%.